Welcome to episode 3 of Radio Omnicor's podcast. I'm your host, Colleen McLintock, and today the episode is called The Emperor's New Clothes. And soon you'll meet Marc Kahn and understand exactly why the episode got that fabulous title. Marc Kahn is Global Head of Human Resources and Organizational Development for the Investec Group. He's a chartered business coach with the Worldwide Association of Business Coaches, a clinical psychologist with registrations with both South African and Australian bodies, and a seasoned management and organizational development consultant. He is the author of Coaching on the Axis, Working with Complexity in Business and Executive Coaching. He lectures at universities and business schools, has published several papers in peer-reviewed academic journals, and appears fairly regularly as an expert guest on radio and television and podcasts. It's a great privilege for me, and in the coaching world, you are the person I look up to and aspire to, and I love your anti-voice in the coaching world. And it's really been, as soon as we had the idea of the podcast, for me, the big vision was having you, and everyone went, yeah, if you could get Marc Kahn, that'll be really great. And so here you are, and we're really thrilled about that. So, Marc, let's start off with a personal question, I guess. If I'm correct, you're currently the global head, HR director, OD director for Investec.
That's right, yeah.
My question to you is, how do you manage work-life integration? You're a father of 4, you're traveling a lot, you have a huge responsibility. And what are the tools and daily practices that you have in place so that you stay connected and don't burn out?
You really cut right to the bone there with that question as we just open the batting. I don't have an easy answer, mainly because I'm not all that successful myself personally in managing work-life balance. I suppose I could teach it. It's a bit of the cobbler's children have no shoes. So I travel a lot. I don't have enough me time. I certainly don't have enough time with my kids. And I would like more of that. But as I think there's a little bit of a myth out there is that it is possible to have it all. I don't think I've ever met anyone that's had it all. There has to be some kind of offsetting somewhere. Some choices need to be made. I think particularly so, funny enough, for women in the workplace who are young mothers. I think they make the hardest choices. I don't think there's an easy work-life balance answer for them. So that would be the most acute work-life balance challenge that I think industry faces. But for me personally, it's the travel. So some people, work very hard, long hours, but other people travel. And if you travel and you travel internationally, it's extremely hard to manage. And managing energy as well with the travel. So
it's amazing to me. I read that part of why you got into coaching was just your involvement with martial arts. Is that something that you can still keep up? Is it something that you still do?
So I don't practice martial arts in the same way that I used to. I was a very serious martial arts practitioner since I was a teenager. And I stopped formally training about 10 years ago. Although I'm still involved organizationally and I mentor certain of the trainers. My first experience of coaching was in the 1980s. Through martial arts, and in particular my own martial arts teacher. So, back then coaching wasn't thought about in the way it is now in industry, of course. It really was something that only came onto the landscape in the workplace in the 90s. That's globally, and in South Africa really in the 2000s. But in the 80s, I experienced something different from being trained by a teacher in my martial arts relationship. There was something a lot more. There was something about the quality of the relationship and the way that I was engaged with, and that stood out for me and that I emulated, I suppose. So when coaching came on the scene, and of course I trained as a psychologist, so the combination came out there. But it all kind of came together in coaching.
Right. And I think it's a good point to talk about the book that you've written, which is, I guess, next to every good coach's bed. It should be.
Oh, you're very kind. I sometimes think of that book as a very good cure for insomnia. Well, I hope it isn't, but...
Or it could give you nightmares when it terrifies you as a coach to go, oh my word, I'm doing that in my coaching practice, I should stop. So tell us a bit about your book and what brings you to writing it and your hope for it.
So I was asked to write that book by Carnac Books out of London. And I guess the reason that I was asked to write it was because I had published a journal article some years prior, which was published in the International Coaching Psychology Review, in which I raised some very key concerns about how business and executive coaching was not being properly differentiated in the market from other forms of coaching like life coaching and other forms of helping like counseling and consulting and so forth. And Professor David Lane out of the UK, he had a look at this and contacted me and said, look, would you be interested to convert this journal article that you wrote into a book for Carnac, because Carnac produces this coaching series, which they, I suppose, market as the definitive series on coaching. Of course, that's possibly a marketing position, because I don't think there is such a thing as the definitive series, but and he felt that this would cover a particular piece in the narrative of the field. Said to me, it would take you a few months because you've written the journal article. Take a few months, every now and then on weekends. You'll write it. You'll see it won't be such a lot of work, And 3 years later, I managed to finish it with quite a bit of focus at the end there, just to get it done. So it was a much greater task than I predicted. I probably would not have written it given my workload, if I knew what it entailed to get a book out.
I understand that as an author. It seems easy to do, but it's a big challenge. So I guess my next question is, what is your leadership style? I know you're really well known for being a believer in leadership. What would you say it was to like? What is it like to work with Marc Kahn? What is your leadership style?
So I'm a big believer in freedom. I begin and end with the idea that the more freedom I can create in the environment for the people that I'm leading, the greater the performance and the sense of well-being. So I'm a low management control person, and high trust. That's my idea. To the extent that at times there may be some risk in people kind of going off without checking and asking for forgiveness rather than permission. But I prefer that set of problems to the other side of the continuum with high management control, and then people are asking permission all the time, and it slows their thinking down and reduces the agility of the arena. So that for me is number one: high freedom for people with high trust and low controls. And that's also because, I suppose, as with every leader, I prefer to work like that too. Right. I report to the CEO, and he leaves me alone most of the time, and I appreciate that. He trusts me, and you know your stuff, Mark, and let me know if you need some assistance, and he'll check in with something or whatever. And I think that is conducive for me to work well. I don't think everyone works well like that, though. I think some people want to be told what to do, and those individuals don't do well under me, unfortunately. So the more structured thinking, more operational. Correct. People who are highly structured need huge amounts of planning before they take action, and require permission to do things, and cover themselves all the time by tracking the authorizations. These individuals would struggle with me leading them. Because if they said, what should I do? I would say to them, well, what do you think you should do? So it's that discomfort with the ambiguity and the options. Correct. I mean, I think of an example, I got an email on the weekend from someone in our London office saying, I see that we've got a meeting on this date, but I've also wanting to do some work in our New York office on the same date. And, this is the nature of the work and it's really important. And also our meeting is really important. And, but I don't know what to do. And I just responded and said, sounds like you're in a pickle.
Right.
Full stop, sent the email. So some might think that's not good leadership, but I think that what I did was and it comes from the coaching philosophy.
Right.
I put the locus of control back to this person, and they may experience it as frustrating, but actually what it does is it activates their own sensibility, their own ability to use their discretion about what's important and what isn't, and provides them with the freedom to choose. And unless there was a requirement for them to be at that meeting that could not be broken no matter what they wanted, I would let them make the choice every time, and even if it wasn't perfectly what I wanted. So that's how I lead, but I don't think it's for everyone.
Performance management is an interesting space. It's changing. Big organizations are canning it. And what is your view, and how do you track performance?
How does Investec track performance, or philosophically, how do I think about performance?
Well, I guess both. Yeah, both.
So, you really pushed a button here as well, Colleen, you're right on. I think earlier you mentioned something about me being a sort of irreverent character, or calling the emperor naked because I can see he's not wearing any clothes type thing. I think it is a bit of the emperor's new clothes when it comes to performance management in the world today. I think that the sort of balanced scorecard, KPI, KRA, 5-digit Likert scale rating system around performance, I think that's the emperor's new clothes. I seriously question whether we really do achieve, using those methodologies, whether we do achieve meaningful performance improvement and subsequently performance management when it doesn't work. I think it's counterintuitive. I think it creates a sense of an individual being a machine that you can program. So, if you look at the way that method works, it assumes a human being is a machine. You've got a code, and the code is like these KPIs and scores, and then you sort of put your program in at the beginning of the year, and then you run the program, and then you correct the code along the way. I mean, this is a completely contradictory notion of what it is to be human. It's definitely perfect for a computer. If you want a computer to perform, the more clarity you can produce up front for it to run, the better it'll be. But a human being engages in a completely different way with their environment. They don't work to paint by numbers. And if I gave the best correlation I would give is, if you want to create an artist, if you want someone to be an artist, and you give them a paint by numbers picture, and you're always painting by numbers, they'll always produce a perfectly good painting based on the paint by numbers. But they'll never be an artist, and they'll never be creative, and they'll never try something new, and you'll never get any innovation. And they won't do anything to surprise you or them, and they'll never think outside the box. And they definitely will not be excited about working, because how many paint by numbers can you do before you lose your passion and your dream? So to me, the way we think about performance mainstream in the work today is paint by numbers. And what I think we should be doing is letting people be artists and coaching them. That's where I think the coaching philosophy comes in. Coaching them to discover and uncover the possibilities for what exceptional performance looks like for them along their journey. And then, okay, every now and then you have a downside because you get someone who's, not doing well, or being lazy, or, got some kind of ulterior motive and not working properly. But to tell you the truth, what's the percentage of those? It's actually a very small percentage of your workforce is actually people who don't want to work or taking advantage or whatever. So how can you organize your entire system to deal with the small, low end? I mean, if you look at performance management today, it's almost a legal methodology to cover companies for the very small percentage of people that they're going to run into problems with. It is not an approach to activate extraordinary outcomes and motivate their people to perform extraordinarily. So it's cart before horse. It's the emperor's new clothes. It's not working. No one wants to be on a scorecard. You find me one person who says, ooh, my scorecard. Oh, I'm so excited. I'm really motivated now to perform. I mean, come on. It's the emperor's new clothes. I don't think it's going to be around in 10 years. I think the whole world will drop it like a bad habit over the next 10 years.
So, Marc, what are the alternatives for organizations? As the head of OD, I'm sure you've got some really nervous leaders saying, give us something to measure our team by.
So it's an excellent question, because I think that the beginning of answering it comes to some fundamental assumptions about people and work that we have to go to. So if we're going to replace the paint by numbers way of seeing, of driving behavior from a performance point of view, we have to be careful that we don't replace it with another type of paint by numbers that's just got a different kind of emperor's new clothes on. There has to be a fundamental change in the cultural assumptions around what it is to be human in the workplace. And I would begin with leaders in the organization with that conversation. So the conversation number one has got to be, why do people work other than for the money? See, that is a very, very important question. Why do you work other than for the money? We know that you work for the money, and there's no problem with that, and you should work for money, and that's good. I mean, there's no problem there. But it's not the only reason you work. And when you ask people that, it gets them thinking. So if I said to you, Colleen, why do you work other than for the money? What would you say?
To inspire people.
Right. So then we know that inspiration is part of the narrative that gets you up in the morning. And why else do you work other than for the money?
To make a difference, to have a purpose.
Right. So you're going to notions of purpose and making a difference. So now we know that inspiration, making a difference, and meaning and purpose in a particular way are key drivers that get you out of bed. So when we think about your performance, we have to think along those lines. We think in the positive, not in the negative. In other words, the old paint by numbers is where you think in the negative. It says, you must do these things and not anything else. And if you don't do these things, there's the negative, there are consequences. And if you do something that's not on this list, that's a negative. You've got to do what's on this list. And we have to put that aside and say, what if we allowed people to realize the vision and dream they have for their life in the work that we need done? And that's the performance narrative. That's the link. So then I would say to you, okay, let me as your leader understand what inspiration means for you as an individual in your own personal story. What making a difference looks like for you in your own personal story. What the purpose is of your work for you. What is that narrative? And then we look at the work, the role, the tasks around which you need to deliver. There's a role that you're going to take up to create value. And the performance drive is to create a chemistry between the two. It's to find a perfect correlation, if you like, or as close to it as you can. And I'll give you a story to explain this, and I've been given permission to tell the story. One individual, a woman, she is one of the best aviation finance deal makers in South Africa, and she works for us. She's in her 30s. She's a super performer. What makes her a super performer? I think it goes without saying, it's not a scorecard. Okay? Otherwise, there'd be no point in telling you the story.
Exactly.
Okay. So what is it? All right. So what if I told you that, and this is true, that when she was a child, what do you think her dad did? And still does, actually, but he's retired. What do you think his work was.
A pilot.
Correct, he was a pilot. And he wasn't just any pilot, he was a pilot for the Defence Force, a fighter pilot.
Wow.
Like Top Gun style, okay, with the Ray-Bans and you can imagine it, okay. Now I want you to imagine you're a little girl, your dad's away a lot, and when he comes home, he sometimes comes home in his fatigues with his Ray-Bans, having just flown a fighter jet, right? And you love your dad. And he's like, it like is Tom Cruise, basically. Okay.
Hero stuff.
Hero stuff. And she loves her dad just like any little girl loves her dad if it's a good dad. What do you think when she was young she loved to talk about with her dad? Flying. Aeroplanes. Exactly. She read up on it, she learnt about it, and it was a connection to her father, but also she was inspired by this. What do you think she wanted to be when she grew up?
A pilot.
A pilot.
Like her dad.
Like her dad. But one problem, that was not her talent. What was her talent? She probably inherited from her mom, was she's exceptionally good with numbers. Exceptionally good. And she loved mathematics and accounting. So she went into accounting and still loved aeroplanes. And then she discovered that there's a field in finance called aviation finance, where you do the deals to finance the planes. And if you get onto like a Comair plane or a BA plane, next time you do, as you walk up the stairs, look on the inside of where they open the door, and you'll sometimes see a sticker there saying, financed by Investec.
Really?
Or whatever bank. Because, in the aviation industry, just the same as you have your house financed, airplanes are financed. When she discovered this field, it was like a chemistry came together for her. Her talent in accounting and her passion around airplanes and her connection to her father. How fast do you think she became? How quick was it for her to become a leading expert in this field?
It was effortless for her.
Effortless. Now you see, you know your stuff, Colleen, because you put your finger on a very, very important word. Effortless. That is work that is effortless for excellence. Why is that work effortless for excellence? It's effortless because it's perfectly aligned to the dream of the individual as a human being. And you can give her 1,000 clever scorecards. It'll be irrelevant to her performance. In fact, if you put a scorecard on her, what do you think would happen to her performance?
She'd shrink the whole role.
Correct. It would drop the performance because you would be constraining the freedom of her talent.
And then she'd have to think about it, I suppose.
Well, she'd have to predict where things are going. Imagine if you were a manager that got into like a control function on top of her and told her, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. Do you think she really feels like she's going to work when she goes to work? She feels that, she doesn't want to necessarily always go home because it's just another thing to do around the new spec on the latest Boeing. And plus she's got all the sort of, accounting genius that goes with it. And she's flying all over the world and meeting with airlines and doing deals. And then she phones her father twice a day and tells him about what she did. And her father says, did you hear about this? And who gets all the upside other than her? The company. And that is how we should think about performance. That is the artist, not the paint by numbers.
So it feels like you're falling in love with your role a bit when you articulate it like that. How many people go to work, Mark, every day feeling like she does, though?
Very,
the sad reality.
Very, 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 very few. And I think that there are two reasons for that. I think that the quick retort is, yes, but that's an exception. And it would be true at one level. Most people go to work and like, oh God, how long before lunch, right? But I think that there's a little bit of a mythology there which we must just break. There are two reasons why that happens to people. And the first reason is the obvious one, which is that not everyone gets to do work that is interesting or, exciting and connected to some kind of passionate pursuit. And like a large percentage of the work that's required in an economy is not that kind of work. And so people say, well, because of that, you need a scorecard.
Right.
But it's the second point I want to make which blows that out the water. What we have found is that people who do fairly menial work or work that is not necessarily aligned to their passion, vision, or hobbies, and that is quite hard at times, when they work with a leader and colleagues in a way that gives them the freedom to engage in that work in a way that is human, in a way that is very, very feeling in orientation rather than task in orientation, where the relationships, and I really want to underline the word relationships, where the relationships and the culture are one of connection, one of seeing each other's stories, one of working together in true real collaboration in a way that feels worthwhile, then people love their work. Let's take digging a hole. You see,
you're not going to find a way.
You absolutely can.
Really?
Digging a hole. If you take a group of individuals and you say, right, I would like the three of you to dig this hole, and you put them on performance contracts and management time, whatever, it's going to be horrible. But if you say to these three individuals, have fun digging this hole, and have fun digging it really fast, and find a way to dig it where you have music, or you laugh together, or you have fun, and they might actually really enjoy digging that hole. Because it's not just about digging a hole. There's physical exertion in it. There's rapport between them. You see, and that's what we forget. We forget that it's not about the task, actually. It's about the emotional content and the relational field around the task.
And the system, which you're so well known for pointing out.
Correct, the system. Similarly, people who are doing work that they love, like this lady with aviation finance, if you put her in an environment where she's got to paint by numbers, she won't be passionate about aviation finance. It'll kill it. So you see, it's not necessarily that the task has got to be interesting in and of itself, but the human experience around the task and the relationship, the culture, and as you put it, the system has got to be has got to have human consideration in it and not treat people like machines. And that's the key. That will change the world. There's no question about it. And
I really feel like Investec's got that right. The culture and just the vibe and the collaboration.
Well, we try. Part of my job there is to protect it and ensure that we don't have what I call viruses enter the system, which are foreign bodies. And I don't mean it as human beings, but I mean it as foreign ideologies that come in often with the best of intentions, but actually result in creating a machine environment as opposed to a human environment. So that's one of the things. And to also accelerate it, to see what's possible.
So Marc, talking of recruitment practices and the idea that you don't want these foreign bodies in your organization, how do you interview for culture fit? Because we can look at competencies, we can look at all other ideas, but is it just a sense of you are going to fit into this environment? How do you
locate it?
Yeah, and I think you speak about
how do you make a decision?
Yes, and I think you also speak about it in coaching, sort of the scent of the organization. How do you know if someone has got that?
Okay, so I like to make an analogy to friendship and romantic relationships. You see, if you have like a matchmaker, which, obviously there are matchmakers, there's a degree to which you can assess a person's character and who they are and so forth, and versus someone else's, and match them together. But something can't be predicted, which is whether or not when they meet, a friendship will form. Or, even more difficult, a romance will ensue. Now, why is that? Why is it that we can't use the genius of psychology and I do think there's genius in psychology, to predict that two people will have a romantic relationship and then match them up, or for that matter, a friendship? We'll have some predictive capability, but it'll be really, really far so far that I will bet you will not find anyone that based on any prediction, they'll say, okay, I'll commit before meeting the person. They'll say, oh, sounds good, but I need to meet the person. Isn't that what they say? I need to meet the person. And not only that, they'll say, after the first time they meet them, most of the time they'll say, well, I need to meet them again. And then you'd say, but I've given you their profile and their CV and their background and where they came from and where they went to school and their parents, and he has 6 psychometric profiles on their personality, and there's a pack, and you've read the whole thing, and you're saying you have to meet them again. What else do you want to know? Now, you're a human being listening to this. You know what do you want to know? What is the answer to that question? Why would you want to meet them a second time before you decide that this is a romance you want to follow or a friend that you want to have in your life? Why? Why don't you trust the big pack of documents?
Is it a fit?
But I'm actually asking, what would your retort be? What do you say? Why would you want to meet? You would want to meet them more, right?
Right.
Okay, but why? Why aren't you?
Because it's a big risk. It's a big commitment you're making in this relationship.
But why aren't you satisfied to make the commitment on the enormous data that's been presented to you and the fact that you just met this person?
Well, I guess it's the human relationships you spoke about.
Bingo. And the answer is exactly that. It's the word relationship. You see, there's something that happens, and it's, if you look into systems theory, that's the academic basis for it. But there's something that happens when people interact with each other that creates a third space, which cannot be known by virtue of understanding the two parts. So if we take you and I, there's knowing you, and then there's knowing me. I'm sure there's a song that goes like that, right?
Yes.
So there's knowing you and there's knowing me. And that is one set of information. But then there's you and I together. And you and I together is not just the sum of you and me. There's something that's created in a third space called the relationship. And we only know that by interacting. It's like chemistry. When you put the chemicals together, a different chemical is created. Now in chemistry, perhaps there are enough molecular variables that you could predict it, which is the base of chemistry. But with a human being, the variables are in the millions, possibly in the hundreds of millions or even billions that you would need to account for in the chemistry of two people coming together and having a romance. This is why two people who you might, on their own individual assessments, you might think of them as being completely incompatible, surprise you when they meet and they have this romance. Haven't you ever seen that? And you, how many times have you do married couples and you think, but how is it that they married? I mean, they are just so completely different or whatever. But something about them when they come together creates it. At the same time, you think two people who are perfect for each other don't get on, getting divorced, can't hit it off, and you can't understand why, because from your perspective, they seem perfectly matched. So this is why when it comes to culture fit, the only way to really assess culture fit is through interviewing and through engagement and contact, bringing the individual into relationship with the people in the environment within which they're going to work in an iterative way, not once but repeatedly over a period of time, to get a sense of the chemistry of them together. That is how you assess culture fit. Because culture fit is a relational statement. It's a statement of connection. The fit is a relational fit, not a competency fit. Competency is easy. You can test technical skill, that's fine. If someone says they can code in whatever language, well, okay, code for us. They either can or they can't. That's easy. Do as many technical tests as you like. Competencies, you can get references on competencies and things like that. But the bottom line is, in the end, engagement is the only way to make that, that decision. And so multiple interviewing iteratively with multiple people in the organization and specifically in the team within which that person is going to interact, and then trusting the interviewers to have their antenna around the chemistry and for them to say, yes, this person fits. That is how you make your decision.
It's a tricky one, because if we look at all the human biases that we're so flooded with and filter our world through, you might lose some talented individuals because your managers might have a bias towards something that's emerging in that third space. But I guess you have to trust that's what's right for the system at the time.
Well, let's think about what bias is. You see, the fantasy around testing for culture fit is that you exclude bias.
Right.
Because there's an assumption that this is an objective test. Unfortunately, nothing could be further from the truth. The bias you get is based in the constraints of the test. Because every single test is based on a set of lenses which have been created by the researcher that developed the test. And then you only see the person in terms of those constraints. And that's all you see. And it excludes phenomena outside its frame of reference. I mean, there was an anthropologist, a medical anthropologist by the name of Eisenberg, fantastic guy, did a lot of research in the 70s and 80s. And he said models act to verify themselves and exclude phenomena outside their frame of reference. Models act to verify themselves and exclude phenomena outside their frame of reference. So any model that you create, what it does is it starts to exclude that which it can't account for, and then, seek to verify itself. It wants to replicate itself again and again and again. So if you keep using the same test to make your selection, you actually bias in favor of all those constraints of the test, and you start to get quite a constrained pool of people coming through because they fit a particular profile. So the irony is it's the reverse. Whereas if you allow people, in multiple interviews who don't come from models, who allow the chemistry, yes, you get their biases, but those biases start mixing with each other and are different every time. So you get a complexity of engagement and a much more, more diverse workforce as a result. It is, in the end, of course, a fantasy that you could ever do any kind of recruitment and not inadvertently select someone who is poor at fitting in, or the reverse, exclude someone who would have been excellent. You are going to always have that happening no matter what you do. I mean, that's just the nature of it.
So this is a question around coach selection, and it fits into how do we know who will like a particular coach. What's your view on coach matching? So some organizations will say, well, Mark, I really know you so well, I'm going to set you up with Bob as your coach. How do you view the whole idea of coach matching?
Look, I think coach matching is fine. I really do. I think that, again, it's useful if it creates a short list. But I would go for coach matching where they make the selection and away you go. So if you get coach matching and say, look, well, based on what you're looking for here, I would sort of select these 3 coaches, meet them and see what the chemistry is like. Let's talk after you've met all 3 and let's make that selection. Then you're combining together a filtering process which is very, creates an efficiency for the person, because if they have to interview 100 coaches or 20 coaches, it's just not, sensible to do that. So you're helping them by filtering it down. Right. But at the same time, you're providing enough choice with 3 that they get the chemistry that's necessary for good coaching. So I like it, from that point of view.
Mark, in your experience of you've been coaching for many years, does a client stand out for you that was really successful, somebody you coached that still sits in your mind?
I don't think any one in particular. Funny enough, I remember a story, and it might not fit your question perfectly, but it's a cute story about a client, which comes to mind, where I only saw this person for like 2 sessions, maybe 3. It was an HR manager who asked me to come in and work with an American chap who had come to South Africa as a country manager in a company. And she said to me, look, can you come and help this chap? He is finding it very, very difficult to fit in with the culture. And in particular, people say that he's unapproachable, it's difficult to talk to, they feel that he doesn't make contact with them, and, it's a bad start. Come along, see if you can help him. She then sort of whispered in my ear in a certain way, I think he's a bit, mental in some way. Like, she was trying to sort of, she didn't have the language, but she was trying to say she thought there was something sort of wrong with this chap.
Sure.
Excuse me. And she was specifically suggesting he had some kind of difficulty emotionally with like contacting people, you know. I said, all right, let me meet him and let's see. So I meet with him. When I meet with him one-on-one, I think he makes good contact with me. I find him easy to engage with. He says he's had coaching before. So I'm finding the relationship fairly easy. And I'm confused because he's making contact with me, yet the brief is he doesn't make contact. In the second session, we arrive at the building where they work, because it was an early morning session, at the same time in our cars. We park not far from each other and we walk into the building at the same time. In order to get to his little office, we had to walk through the floor where there were lots of people sitting in open plan. Now it's first thing in the morning, many people are at their desks already and so forth. And I worked with this company before, so I knew quite a lot of the people. And as I'm walking through the open plan space, I'm greeting people. Very South African thing to do. We're a fairly friendly bunch, the South Africans, I've always found. Hi, how are you, etc., etc. How's it? You know, that whole thing. Okay. I noticed that he, however, greets no one.
Right.
And no one greets him. And he sort of keeps his eyes front and walks straight to his office. When we get there, I say to him, look, help me out here because I'm not really understanding. We just walked through your company and I noticed that no one greeted you and you didn't greet anyone else. And quite honestly, it was a little awkward because I was the one doing the greeting. Help me understand your choice here, because you've made a choice not to greet them, or maybe I've got it wrong. I mean, why is this happening? Then he says to me, I don't believe one should become friendly with people at work. And I said, oh, okay, why is that? He said, because I found in my career, particularly in the States, that if you become friendly with people at work, it compromises your integrity, because those that you become more friendly with, you have a bias towards around decision making around them, and secondly, they influence you and create a subjectivity on things where you should be objective. And so he said he had a mentor in America that told him, when you lead people, you treat everyone the same, and the way you do that is you don't enter into friendly banter with people at work. And he's followed that in his life, and he's an ethical man and a man of integrity, and as a result he's learned to do this way, and he was quite sort of strict about it. Now you can suddenly see the loop, the axis, I call it the axis in my book, Coaching Axis, between the environment, the requirements of the environment, and the individual's own story about how they've taken up the role, and the way these two come together to create a business outcome which is negative. In this case, a leader that is experienced to be unapproachable, which results in people not necessarily raising issues, or will be a reduction in the information flow to the leader in what is happening on the ground. I mean, that's just some of the downsides from a business point of view. So to cut a long story short, what we did is we debated this philosophy in the coaching dialogue. Firstly, by me affirming his thinking at one level to say, okay, I kind of get it. And that really does make a lot of sense, doesn't it? I mean, it's sort of an insistence on objectivity and ethics and integrity. I mean, clearly important things. And not all. And we brought up the environmental voice, which was this organizational voice saying not approachable, and we looked at all the negative feedback coming around that, and we started to balance them out a little bit in his thinking and try and create another narrative. He was kind of half interested in testing it, curious enough to try and experiment. And the experiment was that for the following week, each morning, he would stop 3 times as he walked through the open space to get to his desk, and he would stop at 3 different people each time. There was probably about 80 people on the floor, and he would stop and say, hi, so-and-so, and if you didn't know the person's name, he'd say, please, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, what's your name? They'd say whatever, and he'd say, how are you and how are things going? the person would give a response, and then he'd simply say, "Thank you, it's good to know, and have a great day." You know, Americans love to say, "Have a great day."
Right.
And he added, also, "Have a great day." It sort of like closes it all. And he would do that 3 times each morning, and 3 different people each morning. He said to me, "No chance, it won't work." I said, "All right, well, let's give it a bash, see what happens." He then sort of risk managed it. He said, "Well, let's just look at all the risks of me doing this."
Really?
Yes. And we went through all the downsides of him doing this. How, if he agreed these 3 people, why other people would think he's being biased? Why did he choose them and not the others? And because you could see how his thinking went.
Over analytical,
Yes.
sure.
So anyway, thankfully he agreed to give it a try. And 3 days into the experiment, I get a call from the HR manager. She opens the conversation like this: "Mark, I can't remember how much we're paying you, but it's not enough." I say, "Why?" She says, "In 2 sessions, you have transformed the personality of this guy. He is a different human being. Wow. He is not the same man."
Wow.
And people say they can go and talk to people, are now making appointments to come and see him and so forth.
Wow.
I arrive the following week and I sit down with him. He says to me, "I tried your experiment and it didn't work." He says, "It didn't work." I say, "Why?" He says, "Because I'm exactly the same and everyone's exactly the same. I just greet them in the morning. There's been no change. I still do everything I would normally do, and there is no change. See, so it doesn't work." So I said, "All right, just hang on a minute." And I call the HR manager to come in, and I say, "So-and-so, would you mind sharing with your leader here the change in the environmental perception of him in the past week?" She then, in a very effusive, she almost sort of hugged the guy, which thankfully she didn't do, because he wasn't that sort of type. And she then presents to him how that he's a changed man. And he looks at me, he says to me, "Very strange." Well, he says, "Very strange, because I'm exactly the same. I just greet them." And, that's the end of the story. But I offer that story because return on investment for 2-3 coaching sessions, pretty high there, And so that is also an example of what I consider to be effective business coaching, because it's not focused on, the pursuit of truth, meaning, purpose, and wellness. It's really looking at what is happening in the relationship between the individual and the organization, and how can we activate a more successful outcome. And sometimes it's a small thing.
So, Mark, the one point that sticks out is how you don't believe that other people should be communicating in this triangulated relationship. That is the coachee, the coach, and HR. And I love it how you use this example and you say you brought the HR person into the room and you got them to give the message, because your view is don't be the messenger. And I think many coaches fall into that trap, and then it becomes almost a gossiping session without the client. And the other thing that stands out for me is how coaching in the environment, if you had been coaching offsite, you would never have had that awareness with this particular client.
Exactly.
And one wonders if you would have been as effective.
Correct. Well, you make 2 excellent points. Okay, the first point is what I call the coach falling into the trap of becoming an agent.
Right.
And then the second one is around who is the client. But let's deal with the agent first. So one of the dangers of coaching is that one becomes a post box or a messenger or an agent for a conversation that is struggling to happen between parties in a context. So it occurs easily, of course. You sit down with a person you're coaching and they share with you how difficult it is to do something with a person they work with, or to say something, and then you say to them, but could you take it up with them? And they say, "Oh, I couldn't do that." No, consequences, and so forth and so on. The danger is that to the extent that you then engage with others in the environment, you might be, offer that voice on behalf of the person and say, "Well, Eric that I spoke to felt that it wasn't that easy to work with you, Jane." Or you say to the HR person, "Eric told me it wasn't that easy for him to work with Jane." Now, in both cases, you are now the messenger. And the danger of that is that you're doing the job of, firstly, you're doing someone else's job, which is an HR person's job. And then there's no differentiation between the HR consultant and you as a coach. But that's a smaller problem. The bigger problem is that you have now removed the opportunity for the people in the environment to have the conversations they need to have to create a real change and sustainable relationship adjustment into the future. And you've possibly even made it more difficult because they're now in a situation of, let's say the message is passed on, and they're now in a situation of, I know that you know that I know, but we haven't spoken. And those situations are usually very tricky to manage in a workplace. And sort of all this below the surface corridor talk and so forth gets amplified rather than reduced. The correct way, as you say, is to find a coaching conversation with that person that gets you to activate them to have the conversation. Which would be to say, how is it that you can have this conversation with Jane? And the person says, no, I couldn't. Then you say, well, our work then is to find a way for you to be able to do that, which right now is not, it doesn't appear to be there for us. But let's go through a process of exposing options. We talk about exposing options in coaching. Understanding the reality to expose the options to take effective action. And really working with that individual, Eric, to now find the other options that he has. And it's not always that he can go and speak to that person. There might have to be more clever ways in an organizational context to work with things. So that's the one. The other one is that on who is the client, right. The value of being in the coaching environment, in the workplace within which the coaching is trying to deliver something, as opposed to making the person being coached leave the workplace and come to your coaching practice room and talk about things and then go back to work. I prefer the former. The latter smacks of a counseling session. And if you have a look at coaches who like to get people to come to their practice room, often their practice room looks like a therapy room. It's 2 comfortable chairs, there's no desk between you, there's usually a box of tissues somewhere, a pot plant, a clock, a bookshelf. I've carefully thought about which books they want in their coaching room. And in many respects, that's a counseling session, which should be separated from the context of work. But if, then you have to ask yourself, well, who's the client? Is the client just the individual? Because if the client is only the individual, then it doesn't matter if they leave work. But in business and executive coaching, the client is both the individual and the organization sponsoring the work. They're both the client. And therefore, if you then don't even go to the place of work, you start to wonder what are your underlying assumptions around work at the workplace as the client as well. And this is where in the book I talk about how business and executive coaching is unique and distinct from life coaching and counseling and so forth by virtue of 3 things, the first of which is a duality of client. In life coaching and in counseling, there's only one client, that's the individual. In business and executive coaching, you've got a dual client. You've got the organization sanctioning the work and the individual being coached. And you have to treat them equitably with all the same considerations. It's probably more akin to marital counseling than it is to individual work if you wanted to use a match on the ethical. If you're working with a couple and you only see the husband or you only see the wife to try and help the marriage, how's that going to work out? You have to see them both. Now, you don't have to see them both every single time to help the marriage along, but you have to understand that your client is the relationship, not one or the other. Because if either think that you're more interested in the other, that's game over. And it's the same with coaching. If the organization feels that you are not acting in its best interests in the way you're doing the coaching by deprioritizing organizational needs and waiting in favor of the individual's needs, that coaching will get cancelled eventually. And vice versa. If the individual feels that you are not acting in their best interests and are not waiting in favor of their interests and needs, they will then either hold their cards close to their chest if they have to come to coaching, or they'll just cancel the coaching. They just won't participate anymore. Both must feel that you are acting equitably in their interests, and you have to maintain a duality of client. Again, to help people, I think about it is that you're helping a couple in their marriage. You know, that's the match if you have to organize it in your mind. And one of the ways of doing that is going to the place of work, not taking the individual out of the place of work to come to your space, because that's just one act which balances the duality.
So has the stigma of coaching changed? Because there's also the element of, well, who's this strange person coming, people asking, why are you seeing this person? Has the stigma of coaching, in your view, changed?
I think it has. I really do think it has. I mean, if I think about how maybe say 10, 15 years ago, how people used to respond to being coached, they would say, look, don't tell anyone.
Right.
And I think that today, we hardly hear that. We do hardly hear that. Probably because so many people have been coached now. And because so many of those people being coached have been coached for reasons of being high talent. That being coached is not seen as a remedial action that had to happen because you had a problem. So you can openly say I'm being coached and people don't know what to assume. They could just as soon assume that you're being coached because you have been marked for promotion.
So it's a status symbol almost.
Well, people can't be sure, you see. So it's sort of got I would say a vanilla connotation now, which is, well, why are you being coached? We don't know. I mean, I'm thinking 2006 I think it was, I'd been coaching an individual in a company. This before I joined Investec. I joined Investec 2008. But 2006 I was coaching an individual in a multinational and had been coaching her for about 18 months. Then she was promoted and she took over Europe, Middle East and Africa. And she then she wanted to have a team session with her heads from all those areas in Egypt, of all places. And then she said to me, listen, I really would like you to come with me to the team session because we're going to be 2 days with all the heads from all these countries. I'd like you to come along. I'll introduce you that you're my coach, sit in the 2 days, meet with the individuals, and I'll be very open and say to them, listen, people, this is my coach. And to the extent to which he has greater context around me taking up my role and delivering value, the better. So please, feel free to talk to him offline. You don't have to check with me. And the more you can help him understand, the more he can help me understand. One has to be careful around agency there. And we did it. We did it 2006, I think it was. 2007 was very effective. Can you imagine the downside of not having gone? And I certainly couldn't have flown to all these countries around the world to meet these people. And we would be working and I'll be working in a little bit of a vacuum. I can't tell you how helpful that was for the coaching to help her understand how to take up her role.
Well, that's a good segue into team coaching, which is kind of a buzzword at the moment. And I have a question. Can a particular coach run both the team coaching and the individual coaching?
So I'm often asked this question, which is questions of boundary.
Right.
Very important question. And I think that a lot of the time the answer to the question is yes and no. And I know it can sound like a bit of a cop-out, but I think I need to explain it a little bit. I think that one of the tragedies of coaching having been born from psychology in the workplace is the importation of medical ethics into business ethics without realizing it. And let me explain that. So I need to first say, I think it's been a blessing that psychology has been so profoundly influential in the rise of coaching and continues to be, and I'm very, very pleased about that. And originally I'm a psychologist myself, so I think it's fantastic that informs the work, and it should. But the ethical notions of counseling and psychotherapy and the way that one conducts counseling and psychotherapy have been automatically imported unconsciously into the boundary arrangements for business and executive coaching without much thought. And this question about, can I coach two people in the same team? Can I coach the manager of the team and someone in the team? Can I do the team coaching and someone in the team? These are all questions of boundary which are important to ask. But a lot of reason why there's a lot of anxiety around it is because of the assumptions of the medical model, which says, if I'm seeing a patient, I can't also see their husband or their child or their father, because there is an ethical requirement to maintain a confidentiality and a dedication to being clear on who your patient is. Now, for counseling and medicine, that's absolutely correct, perfect, and that is the correct ethics. But in business, we don't determine boundaries without considering the merits of the situation in their own right. That's how business ethics works. We look at the merits of the situation, we consider everyone adult, and we think about contract, the notion of contract. So for a team, at a time, it may well be contractually very fruitful to also be coaching the head of the team whilst doing team coaching, in answer to your question. But for a team, at another time, it may produce a whole range of very tricky and destructive dynamics to coach the team and the team leader at the same time. And you would have to assess that in business terms in each and every case in their own right and contract accordingly. So that's why I say yes and no. Have I explained it right?
It makes sense.
Yeah.
I have a question. It happened a real situation. Had a client. She was working for a lawyer in an administrative role. And in the coaching, she divulged that she was stealing. So she wasn't stealing from the company yet. She was stealing from, say, for example, shops and things. Sort
of a habitual shoplifter or something.
Yes. So in the contracting, it was very clear up front if there was risk to the business, it would need to be divulged. But what would your take be in terms of how would you deal with that situation?
So let me be clear so I understand. The company is sponsoring the coaching.
Correct.
So it's business coaching in the true sense.
Correct.
Because, of course, if the individual was paying you, that would be a different arrangement.
Correct.
Okay, so the company is paying, therefore, duality of client. We go back to that principle of duality of client. You have to treat both equitably. And that means you have to act in her best interests and not all, you have to act in the company's best interests. And by her telling you that she's stealing, she has presented an ethical dilemma for you because, to the extent that this does not come out and has not been made, not been declared to the company, it could present risk to the company, particularly if her role is one in which she handles things of value and there may be some temptation there. So so commonly people either swing one direction or the other and then bias. So they either bias, this is the mistake, they either bias in favor of the individual and they get like the medical ethics and they say, medical ethics, whatever the person tells me is confidential, I don't divulge. Okay? So now they fall off the tightrope one direction and they fail because they're not acting in the interests of the company, they're acting only in the interests of the individual. Alternatively, people either then offer the other direction. They say, well, no, that's it. Contracts are binding. That's an ethical breach. Sorry. And they pick up the phone. Hello, Mr. or Ms. HR. Let me just tell you that so-and-so is a thief. Okay. They obviously put it in much kinder terminology, but that's ultimately what they do. Either action is flawed because either action fails to be in the interests of the other. So then you say, okay, well, then you're in trouble. What do you do? Well, always be coaching. Always be coaching. So what you would do is you would then say to the individual who's now shared with you, look, I'm a shoplifter. You would say to the person, okay, you and I are both contracted by this company to deliver value. You in your role and me as the coach. So we are both bound by the same ethical relationship to this company now. So let's go through a conversation right now in which we expose all the options that you and I both have together now that we see that there is this situation. And hopefully the goal is that at the end of this, you come up with a course of action in which we can make this right. See, so what you're hoping to do is to create a positive relationship between the company and the individual. So to the extent that this individual is a bit of a shoplifter, that can sometimes be an emotional problem or something like that, especially they've told you, which means it's probably something they're struggling with. Imagine if they went themselves to the company in a very discreet way and said, look, I'm having this problem. I'm coming to you to declare it very discreetly and quietly so that, we have a good relationship, and I'd like some help maybe with it from your wellness provider, and, help me. But I wouldn't want it to come out and, can we deal with this? That would be a very positive relationship action to take, do you think? It wouldn't mean, oh, well, we're firing you, for two reasons. One is this is a voluntary sharing of a difficulty the person's having, and it creates a likely positive response. It may be that whatever role she's in, she might not be able to be in anymore. I don't know. But in most cases where someone has got like a gambling problem or a shoplifting problem or something like that, there's usually a psychological difficulty. And if there wasn't, they wouldn't be telling you about it.
Right.
So what you're trying to still get is not agency. You're trying to mobilize the individual to have the difficult conversation to create a better relationship. To the extent that this goes on and the person doesn't take that action, you then can say to the person, look, now I'm in a position. So help me now, because I've also got a contract with a company. So what are we going to do? And then you can really, get that person to see that you are not in a position to just do nothing.
Right.
Which hopefully would mobilize them to take action themselves. Does it make sense?
Yes, it does. It's quite an interesting debate to have with coaches and how people respond to the question. Some coaches say, well, that's it, I'd fire the client immediately.
They spin
yes.
left or right.
Exactly.
They won't stay in the relationship. They're either biased for the individual or they're biased for the company. Either bias fails the axis, the coaching axis, which is the relationship. Think about a marital couple where the husband or the wife have just had a one-night stand.
That's a brilliant.
It's the same problem.
Yeah.
You're trying to rescue the relationship, you see. You're not going to, well, if you don't tell him or you don't tell her, I'll tell them. I mean, what good is that, really?
Well, Marc, it's been a fabulous opportunity to ask you these questions, and I'd like to end with one last one, which is, how do you measure success? How do you show ROI in coaching?
So the first thing that I say to that is there's no algorithm. There's just no algorithm to show ROI in coaching, simply again because the variables in the human environment are so great that to control for all those variables, I think only God could do that. And until such time as he or she, being God, does that, let's let go of that notion of measuring. And to me, it's about the creation of value and the narratives around value. So what we would do is what I like to do is I'd like to put the participants in the environment who have a stake in the coaching process, which is the individual themselves, usually their manager, HR, might even be other team members, and let them participate in a storytelling around how the coaching helped or didn't help. And we don't have to hold the water lightly in your hand. If you try and hold water in the palm of your hand, you squeeze too tight, it's gone. You've got to kind of hold it lightly. And one has to hold that narrative lightly in a qualitative way. And through that story, if the stakeholders tell the story in a way that's meaningful to them, I've never found a situation in which at the end they're not able to have a very meaningful sense of value creation or lack thereof in the coaching engagement.
Great. And we will certainly link your interesting YouTube clip regarding your book to our show notes so that people can take a deeper dive into the book. And thank you so much, Marc. It's been a great honor and privilege to interview you today.
No, thank you. It's been great. Thanks for having me.
Good.